everyone from wherever and whichever part of the world you've joined in. Welcome to Sharan and welcome to today's talk, which is extremely, extremely special for us. And why is it special? It's special because we have Dr. Neal Barnard with us. And what makes it so special is because Dr. Neal is Dr. Nandita Shah's mentor, and that's what makes it even more special for us. So for those of you who have joined in first time, Sharan is an organization started by Dr. Nandita Shah, and it's an acronym, and it stands for Sanctuary for Health and Reconnection to Animals and Nature. And Sharan's mission is to build a culture of health. And we want you to reach your highest health potential without any medicines, only through food and nutrition. So without much further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Nandita to honor and invite our special guest today. Thank you. Dr. Nandita, over to you.
Thank you, Reena. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with Dr. Neal Barnard so close by. Dr. Neal Barnard is the founder and president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in Washington, D.C. And I've known him personally since 2009 when he came to India to do a tour through so many cities in India. He spoke at various hospitals and also at medical colleges and even to our audiences at Sharan. And, you know, before he came, I wasn't 100% zero oil. But I was talking to him about how we had to prepare, and he said, I want everything zero oil. And I remember I asked him whether we could have some jaggery, just a tiny bit of jaggery in the dessert. And he said, not a drop. And, you know, ever since then, I've been totally zero oil and 100% zero jaggery. And of course, I was vegan long ago, but, you know, so I really owe so much to Dr. Neal Barnard, and after he left, we started doing the reversing diabetes seminars, and later the reversing diabetes and hypertension seminars. And so really so much that I owe to him. Now, PCRM was founded in 1985. So it's 35 years that they've been doing plant-based advocacy through government organizations, legislation, education, all kinds of things. They advocate for healthy school lunches, or, you know, hundreds of doctors show up in front of the White House to advocate for plant-based nutrition and so many things that they do. And Dr. Neal Barnard is also the author of several books, and the most important of those are the ones on diabetes and mental health or Alzheimer's, as well as now hormonal balance. I had the opportunity to visit PCRM 4 times. I'm so lucky that my brother lives near Washington, D.C. And the first time I did cooking classes with PCRM, and we also did a video. Dr. Neal Barnard, do you remember that? And then, and then the second time I actually attended a training there, which was a Food for Life training, and then brought back cooking classes to India, and we've been doing training. So there's so much I have to thank PCRM for. And the last time that I was there, I was doing a talk at PCRM on hormonal havoc. So, but before, I just don't want to go on and on because there's so much to say about Dr. Neal Barnard, but I want to not take any more of your time or his time, and I want to hand over the mic to him. So Dr. Neal Barnard, please do start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, Dr. Shah, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you and to the many attendees of this program. I have so many friends in India, and frankly, I'm overdue for a return visit. I can't wait to come back. And in the meanwhile, given the circumstances that we have, I'm delighted to be able to talk with you virtually. And if it's all right, I thought I would like to talk about hormones. But before I do that, I would like to talk a little bit about COVID-19. and the role that nutrition may play in COVID-19. And if that would be all right, is it okay with you if I share my screen? And I'd like to show you some images. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can, Doctor.
Very good. Okay. Hopefully, if I've managed to do this correctly, you'll see a slide that says 90% of COVID-19 related deaths are related to underlying medical conditions. So when the disease welled up at the very end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, it was very clear that this disease affected different people differently. Many cases were completely asymptomatic, no symptoms at all. But for some people, they not only developed symptoms, but the symptoms were really quite severe and even life-threatening. And the people who seemed to have the greatest difficulty with this and the highest mortality were people with hypertension, people with diabetes, or people with lung disease. And I'm going to include in that category people with asthma or smokers, and also people with heart disease, overweight people as well. And let me give you an example of how frightening this has been. If you look at people who have extra weight and they get infected with the virus, if you look at who ends up degenerating so that they need a ventilator and who doesn't, for people with a healthy weight, that's a body mass index concept for you. It just means your weight adjusted for how tall you are. And we're going to say that a healthy body mass index is below 25, although some people might be stricter and say below 24 or 23. For people with a body mass index over 35, these were seriously overweight people, the likelihood of them needing to be on a ventilator was 7 times greater. When it comes to diabetes, right away in China, it was very clear that as the virus was emerging, people with diabetes were more likely to die of it. That's been confirmed over and over again. However, in people who have had diabetes and they have this diagnosis, if they are in poor control, meaning their blood sugars tend to run high, their mortality was 11%. But if they're in good control, the mortality was only 1%. So what that means is we want to tackle diabetes and get it under very good control if we can. That can be medication, but it can be food. So high blood pressure, I mentioned as a major issue. But you might be thinking, okay, let's say I have high blood pressure or I have diabetes. These conditions take a long time to improve. Well, do they? Back more than 20 years ago, the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, the DASH study, brought in 459 adults, and they asked them to do 2 things. One was to increase vegetables and fruits, and also to reduce their meat and reduce fat intake. And I want to show you some numbers. This is systolic blood pressure. And the top graph there, can you see that? These are people who did not make diet changes. And as you can see, nothing much happened with their blood pressure. It didn't really fall. The line right under that, those are people who increased their vegetables and fruits. Their blood pressure dropped, probably because vegetables and fruits have potassium in them, they're low in sodium, they're healthier overall. But the line underneath that, where you see that big drop in blood pressure, those are people who increased vegetables and fruits and also reduced or eliminated meat and fat. And what you can see is you get a major improvement in that very rapidly. Now, the top line is systolic blood pressure. The bottom line is diastolic blood pressure. So for example, if your blood pressure is 120/80, systolic is the blood pressure during a heartbeat, and diastolic is the blood pressure between heartbeats, 120/80. So in both cases, systolic and diastolic blood pressure improves. But the most important thing here is to see how quickly blood pressure improves. This was an 8-week study, but blood pressure was better by 2 weeks. So what if the virus is coming into our city And if I have 14 days before the virus arrives, if you adopt a plant-based diet now, rich in vegetables and fruits, and without the meat and the fat, your blood pressure can fall and you'll be in much better shape by the time the virus gets here. The same is true for diabetes. And by the way, if you're having trouble seeing this slide because the pictures are in the way on the right-hand side, you can minimize those using the little prompts, as you'll see. We did a research study funded by the National Institutes of Health with people with type 2 diabetes. The red line here is people in the research study who followed a conventional diabetes diet, limiting calories, limiting carbohydrate. They did well. Their hemoglobin A1C, which is the main measure of blood sugar control, it dropped by about 0.4 absolute percentage points. 0.4 is good. But the other half of the participants followed a completely plant-based diet, a vegan diet, no animal products at all, and we kept the oils really low. And as you can see from that drop in the blue line, they had a threefold greater improvement in their hemoglobin A1C, meaning their diabetes is getting under better and better control, and this happens rapidly. So if a person follows this diet, your health can rebound. Now, are there any foods to really focus on in particular? And the short answer is research is still ongoing. Some researchers have looked at garlic, and I have to say I've been a bit of a garlic skeptic, and I have thought that the people promoting garlic are people who just have a taste for it. However, there was a good study done in the United Kingdom with 146 volunteers. They gave them either garlic or a placebo, that's a dummy pill. They had pills that had garlic in them and pills that had placebo, and they gave it to them for 12 weeks, and they did this during cold season, when the cold virus was running around. So it wasn't COVID-19, but it was the cold viruses. And they found that in the 73 people who were on the placebo, they had about 65 colds. In the garlic group, only 24, and sick days in the placebo group, 366 sick days. In the garlic group, that was cut dramatically. So the research suggests that garlic might help fight viruses. There's a big however here. If you look at who funded the study was funded by the Garlic Center, which is a company in the United Kingdom that sells garlic supplements. So we might have to take it with a grain of salt, may I say? With regard to obesity, I mentioned earlier about obesity, but I want to share with you some statistics from California. This suggests that it didn't start with COVID-19. Back in 2009, we had another pandemic of H1N1, an influenza virus. And among California adults who contracted H1N1, half of them were obese. So the data suggests to us that carrying extra weight makes people vulnerable to viruses. It's not just fat on your body, it can also be fat in your food. High-fat diets interfere with natural killer cell activity. What's that mean? You have in your bloodstream red blood cells that carry the oxygen to all your body parts, but you also have white blood cells, and your white blood cells are soldiers that are there to knock out viruses or bacteria or cancer cells. Well, they can't work in an oil slick. And if you're eating a lot of fatty foods, they don't do well. And you should see how the research is done. Researchers have fed volunteers fatty foods, they've dripped fat into their veins, and they have mixed fat with cells in the test tube. In all of these scenarios, fat interferes with white blood cell activity, so they cannot knock viruses out as effectively. Among the white blood cells are certain cells called natural killer cells. They don't need pre-priming. They are able to recognize and destroy viruses, and fatty diets interfere with their activity. So it's a good idea to get the fat out of your diet. What about dairy products? Researchers have looked at children with asthma, and they found that by excluding dairy products and eggs, you see an improvement in lung function. Specifically, the ability to breathe out. That's called peak expiratory flow rate. You see a significant improvement. Why does that matter? Because COVID-19 is a lung disease. We inhale the virus, it can cause serious pneumonia, and that's usually the cause of death. So getting away from dairy is important. And I know that when I'm traveling in India, my Indian friends always remind me that dairy products are extremely popular and traditional in India. And my point is that it's very useful to realize that getting away from dairy is a good idea. Now, there are certain vitamins and minerals that have been studied: vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. Just very quickly, vitamin C was the subject of a UK study, and it was in elderly people who had lung disease. And they were put on really quite a small amount of vitamin C, just 200 milligrams for 4 weeks, and they had a significant improvement in their lung function. Now, with regard to vitamin D normally comes from the sun. However, some people aren't getting very much sun. That's pretty understandable these days. And vitamin C supplementation reduces the risk of respiratory infections. Now, that's true for just about anybody, but where it's really important is for people who have very low levels of vitamin D as it is. If you look at individuals with low vitamin D levels, the reduction in risk can be on the order of 70%, which is huge. With regard to zinc, at Wayne State University, which is in Michigan, 50 participants who were older, middle-aged and older, were given zinc gluconate for 12 months. And what they found is that it reduces the risk of infections. However, I have a note of caution about this. Zinc in overdose can interfere with immune strength. You don't want too little, but you don't want too much. My recommendation is that zinc is a good idea to take only when a cold has already started. Okay, so there you have it. That's what we know about COVID-19. The most important thing is to tackle weight, blood pressure, diabetes, and lung health with a healthy plant-based diet. Really pump up the vegetables and fruits, and we see how we do. I would like to shift gears and talk about hormones, and I want to start with the example of a young woman who called me up on the phone. She called me up because she asked for painkillers. She needed painkillers because she had terrible menstrual pain. Now, many women have pain, but for about 1 in 10, the menstrual pain is so severe that they may not be going to work or going to school that day at all. And that was her situation. She had a business trip the next day and she said, I can't get out of bed. How can I get on an airplane? So I started thinking about menstrual pain. And I didn't realize at the time that this would lead me to discovering some important things about hormones in general and amazing things that we can do with our health. But let me share with you this one experience with one single case. I said to her, I could give you some painkillers for a couple of days. That should help you to function now. But for the next month, would you like to do an experiment with me? How about this? No animal products for the next month, but also keep oils to a bare minimum. We're going to really get rid of the oil. She said, well, I'll try anything. And she called me back a month later and said, this is miraculous. Her period arrived with no symptoms, no pain at all. So we did a research study where we randomly assigned a large group of women with pain to either a low-fat vegan diet or a placebo. Excuse me. And what we found was that it worked. Their pain was dramatically reduced. In the course of this research study, we asked all the women to not use any hormonal treatments, hormonal medications, because that would confound our study. So we thought that maybe the diet would affect their hormone function, but if they were using birth control pills or other hormones, that would confuse the results. So we said to our women, if they were sexually active, please use some other kind of contraception, not the pill. One of the women in the study said, Dr. Barnard, you don't have to worry about me. I don't use contraception at all. She said that she and her husband had given up the idea of having a family. They had both been evaluated. She said, it's not him, it's me. She was infertile. She didn't ovulate. She said, so they didn't use the birth control pill. They didn't use any contraception. She was infertile. Well, the second month that she was on the low-fat vegan diet, she came into our research center and she said, Dr. Barnard, I have some bad news and I have some good news. I said, what is that? And she said, well, the bad news is that I'm leaving your study because the good news is I am pregnant. To her surprise, she got pregnant right away. And I ran into her a number of years later, and at that point she had 3 children. So the first patient I described had a condition called dysmenorrhea, menstrual pain. And the second one had infertility. In both cases, the truth is they were not in hormonal balance. Okay, let me stop at this point and go back to what we're really talking about. I'm sorry. I forgot. I need to show you a picture of my first patient. This is her in terrible pain. Okay, just kidding there. All right, so here is the program that we use for menstrual pain. No animal products, minimizing oils. And our research study showed a significant improvement in menstrual pain. In fact, we published the results in a journal called Obstetrics and Gynecology. And the pain intensity fell quite significantly, and the pain duration as well. Okay, so what are hormones anyway? Hormones are compounds that are made in one part of the body, and they travel to other parts of the body. They travel through the bloodstream to your various organs to give them directions, what to do. So hormones are like letters. A letter goes in the mail, and it goes to some other place, and it provides information. So if the ovaries in a woman's body make estrogens, they go to her uterus and to the other sex organs to get ready for reproduction. If the thyroid gland at the base of your neck makes thyroid hormone, that travels in the bloodstream to other parts of the body to give them energy. In a man's body, the testes make testosterone, which I guess goes in his bloodstream, goes to his brain and makes him decide to run for president. Just kidding. Okay, but hormones are like letters. They're information that goes from one part of the body somewhere else. And you can have not enough hormones, and that can mean that you're not going to be physically well. But the opposite can happen too, where you have too many hormones, too many letters in the mail. That's hormone overload. Either way, your hormones are going to misbehave. So let me go back to the first patient that I described. She had menstrual pain. I want to focus on the hormone estrogen. Now, estrogen is in fact a group of hormones, but I'm going to call them all collectively estrogen. At the beginning of the month, there is not very much estrogen in a woman's bloodstream, but it gradually increases. After about 2 weeks, it reaches a peak and then it falls. She is now ovulating. Her ovary is releasing an egg. And then for the next week or so, the amount of estrogen rises again, and that's because the uterus is the most optimistic organ in the body. Every month, it's convinced it's going to get pregnant for sure, so the amount of estrogen rises in order to thicken up the uterine lining. The inside of the uterus thickens up to get ready for pregnancy. But after about a week or so, the disappointed uterus discovers that we're not pregnant after all. The amount of estrogen falls, and that menstrual flow discards the inner lining of the uterus. Let me show you what this really looks like. This is the uterus in the middle of the screen. And on either side, the right and left side, are the ovaries connected by the fallopian tubes. Well, every month it's normal for that uterine lining to thicken up. But what if I have too much estrogen, too much of this sex hormone in my blood? That estrogen line, that endometrial lining can thicken up too much. It releases prostaglandins that cause terrible pain. So if I have too much estrogen in the blood, that thickens up that lining and that causes pain. Okay, so can foods help? They sure can. And to show you how, let me talk about another young woman named Catherine. Catherine was in the United States Air Force. She went into Iraq in 2003 during the war, and she was over there building military bases. And when you're in a war zone and you're eating what the government gives you, you don't gain a lot of weight. However, when her tour of duty was finished, she was sent back to the United States. And when she got home, her friends took her out to eat, and they tried to make up for all the foods that she had missed when she was in Iraq. And the foods that she loved the most? Cheese, macaroni and cheese snacks. And for her birthday, a friend gave her an entire case, 48 packs of macaroni and cheese dinners. She ate all of these cheesy foods, and she started to gain weight. But she also developed pain in her abdomen that got worse and worse, and finally a doctor diagnosed it as endometriosis. Endometriosis is a condition where cells that are supposed to be lining the uterus have now escaped, and they're traveling around the abdomen, and they implant, and they swell, and they bleed, and they cause terrible pain. They can also lead to infertility. Her doctor prescribed hormonal medications and painkillers, but nothing helped. She was in pain every single day. Finally, her doctor said, well, if we take out your uterus, the pain will go away. She thought, what, a hysterectomy? She was only 27 years old. She wasn't so sure she wanted to do that because it would mean she could never have a family. But her doctor said, well, you're probably infertile anyway as a result of the disease, because it's all around your abdomen. It can attack the ovaries and the fallopian tubes and so forth. You're probably infertile. Go ahead and have your uterus removed. She agreed to that. So they made they scheduled the hysterectomy 6 weeks later. But before she could have the hysterectomy, she went to a nutritionist who prescribed the same diet that I had given to the young woman with terrible pain. No animal products, no milk, no cheese, no meat, no eggs, and kept oils really low. And she suddenly started feeling better. She lost weight and her pain started to diminish. The pain wasn't completely gone, but it was much better. But she dutifully reported to the hospital after 6 weeks for her hysterectomy as prearranged. And the doctor opened her up under anesthesia. But about an hour later, she woke up in the recovery room of the hospital. And the doctor said, Catherine, I need to talk to you. He said, after we opened you up and I looked inside, I realized your endometriosis was effectively gone. And he said, you had a lot of scarring and you had some adhesions which caused the remaining pain that you had. So he freed up those adhesions, but he didn't do the hysterectomy. He didn't take out her uterus. In fact, she still has her uterus. She lost a lot of weight. She's felt much healthier. She now has 3 healthy children. And she has become one of our Food for Life instructors, just like Dr. Shaw, to help people to take back their own health. Okay, so I mentioned cheese and hormones. Does cheese have hormones? Well, yes. Cows don't give milk automatically. Cows are impregnated. And they are typically artificially inseminated in a not very pleasant way. And they become pregnant. And cows are, as you know, pregnant for 9 months out of every 12. If the cow's pregnancy continues 9 months out of every 12, they're typically milked while they are pregnant. Now, cows produce estrogen anyway, and it gets into their milk. When they are pregnant, they produce much more, and so the amount of estrogen that gets in their milk goes up and up and up and up, and it gets into your cheese. Wait a minute. Did I just say that estrogens are in milk and in cheese? Yes, and they're also in yogurt and they're in butter, and there's no such thing as hormone-free milk. Okay, can this affect your biology? Absolutely. Researchers went into a fertility clinic and they looked at men and they looked at their sperm counts. And it turned out that the men consuming the most cheese, that's 1 to 2.5 servings per day, had much lower sperm counts compared to the men who ate less cheese. Am I suggesting that the amounts of estrogens in cheese could be enough to affect a man's fertility? That's exactly what I'm suggesting. It can affect a woman's biology and a man's. Now, men, before we leave, I want to talk to you about one other thing. So many men go to see the doctor, and they say to the doctor they're having trouble performing sexually. They have erectile dysfunction. And they ask the doctor for a Viagra prescription because Viagra will temporarily restore their sexual function. So the doctor says, well, sure, I can write you out a Viagra prescription. And the doctor writes the prescription. The patient grabs the prescription and walks out the door and says, thank you, doctor. At that point, the doctor drops his or her pen and runs out after the patient and says, stop. Before you go down the elevator, I need you to come back here and I have to explain something very important to you. And the doctor tells the patient, the Viagra might help you just for a couple of hours, But the reason you have erectile dysfunction is not because you have performance anxiety. The reason you have erectile dysfunction is because you have narrow arteries. The male sexual anatomy needs blood flow. It requires healthy blood flow in order to function. And if you have narrowed arteries to your private parts, you don't get blood flow, and the man is impotent, has erectile dysfunction. What the doctor explains to the patient is that erectile dysfunction is a sign of narrowed arteries, and if you have narrowed arteries to your private parts, you probably have narrowed arteries to your heart and to your brain, meaning you are at high risk for a heart attack or stroke within the next 3 to 5 years. Viagra doesn't undo any of that. So at that point, the doctor says to the patient, before you go, I want you to sit down with a registered dietitian and start a plant-based diet, because what that will do, since it has no cholesterol and no animal fat, this will allow your arteries to heal on their own so that you can prevent a heart attack and you can prevent a stroke. And as time goes on, your erectile dysfunction may well be cured as well. Okay, are there some other things that affect our hormones? Yes, your body has a way of getting rid of hormones. You see that big red organ, that's your liver. Your liver filters the blood and it pulls estrogens out of the blood and it sends it into the intestinal tract, where the estrogens that your body wants to get rid of go out with the waste. But all this depends on one thing. It depends on fiber, the roughage that's in beans and vegetables and fruits and whole grains. If you have plenty of fiber, that takes those estrogens in the intestinal tract and carries them out with the waste. But let's say your diet was chicken breast or fish. These foods don't have any fiber in them, so the estrogens have nothing to hold on to in the intestinal tract, and they end up being reabsorbed back into your bloodstream, and they end up back at the liver. So women who have low fiber diets tend to have higher levels of estrogen that can interfere they can cause pain and interfere with fertility as well. The answer, trade the animal products, which don't have fiber, for the plant products, which do have fiber. So I want to make sure everybody's paying attention. Some people in the United States and in some other countries that we will not mention, people eat Spam. This is a meat product. And does it have fiber or not? It doesn't have fiber, does it? So we take our trash can and the Spam goes away. KFC. Does KFC have fiber? Anybody? Well, there's some fiber in the carton, but not in the chicken. Chicken's an animal product. Animals don't have fiber, and that can go away too. How about these things that started out as plants, but they were processed so much they became unrecognizable? The fiber was taken out, so we're going to say goodbye to them too. Okay, now we have talked about menstrual cramps, fertility, endometriosis. These conditions won't kill you, but hormones can cause another condition that could well kill you, and that's breast cancer. You see these little dots, those are estrogen. Estrogen sneaks through the cell membrane, it gets inside the breast cell. Once it's inside, it goes through the nuclear membrane, and it can attach to your DNA. And once it does, that estrogen attaching to the DNA can cause that cell to become abnormal. It can split into cancer cells. And those cancer cells can go from 2 cells to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. And they spread throughout the body, ultimately killing you. Well, the more estrogen you have, the higher your risk of breast cancer. This is the risk of postmenopausal breast cancer. And what we're showing is the estrogen-free estradiol. The pattern is very clear. The higher your level of estrogen, the higher your cancer risk. So what do? How do I get my estrogens back into balance? I do what our research participants have done. Cut the fat, that will reduce estrogen. Increase fiber, that will help your body to get rid of excess estrogen. Avoid the dairy products because they have the estrogens in them. A low-fat, dairy-free, plant-based diet is the best way to go. Okay, Let me shift gears, and I'd like to talk about the thyroid. The thyroid is at the base of your neck, and as I said earlier, it sends thyroid hormone into your body to give you energy. It oversees your body's use of energy. If you have too little of it, you're going to feel sluggish. So let me give you an example. Let's say my thyroid gland isn't making much thyroid hormone. I'll feel weak, sensitive to cold, my digestive tract won't work. I'm going to gain weight, my skin and hair won't seem right, my mood will come down. The opposite can happen. If I have too much thyroid hormone, well, I can lose weight. My pulse will be rapid. I'll feel nervous and revved up, and I might have difficulty sleeping. My hair and skin won't feel right. So you can be too low, you can be too high. Well, what's this about? Worldwide, the biggest reason for low thyroid relates to iodine. You see those purple dots there on the thyroid hormone molecule? That's iodine. And you need iodine to make thyroid hormone. Well, what are the main sources? In the United States, iodized salt is very popular. It's somewhat less popular in other parts of the world, but iodized salt is a very good source of iodine. Now, the dairy industry will say, well, there is iodine in dairy products too, and they're right, but they don't want to tell you is where it came from. A cow's udder can get dragged through the mud. It can get feces on it, or it can be caked with milk. So to disinfect the teats of the udder, dairy farmers often use a disinfectant that contains iodine. And some of that disinfectant gets into the milk carrying iodine with it. Not the best source. The healthiest source, sea vegetables. Seaweed, that's right. If you were at a sushi bar, don't have the fish sushi unless you're very well insured, but have the cucumber roll, the veggie roll, the asparagus roll. It's wrapped in nori seaweed, which is a good source of iodine. Wakame, the seaweed that's in miso soup, or arame in your seaweed salad. They're very rich in a healthy form of iodine. So it's great to include it. Now, the second biggest source of problems with the thyroid, going beyond a lack of iodine, antibodies. Your body makes antibodies to destroy viruses. It makes antibodies to knock out bacteria. And in some cases, your body will make antibodies against you. What am I talking about? There are a variety of names. This will not be on the test. But in the United States, this is the biggest problem that we have. In some cases, the antibodies are being made against the thyroid gland, so you can't make thyroid hormone as well anymore. In other cases, the antibodies attack the regulatory machinery so that the thyroid gland can't shut down. Either way. So the question is, can foods affect antibodies? And if so, can foods then affect the thyroid? The Adventist Health Study 2 asked this very question in over 65,000 participants. When we look at hypothyroidism, vegans have the least risk of hypothyroidism. The people who have the most risk are lacto-ovo vegetarians. They're not eating meat, but they're making up for it with milk and cheese and yogurt, and they have the highest risk of thyroid problems with regard to hypothyroidism, low thyroid. When it comes to hyperthyroidism, high thyroid, vegans again do the best, and the people who do the worst are the people who not only consume dairy products, but also consume meat products, meat, poultry, or fish. Why would this be? How is it that foods could trigger hyper or hypothyroidism? What we think is going on in this case is that the proteins in dairy products, in eggs, and in meat can trigger the body to produce antibodies that end up attacking the thyroid gland. Get them out of your diet, you're very likely to do better. Okay, one other hormone that I want to focus on, and this is perhaps of concern to more people than anything else, and that is insulin. Insulin plays a key role in health, and when it's not working right, we can have diabetes. In 2003, the US government funded our research team to try to test a plant-based diet for type 2 diabetes. Our goal was to come up with a better diet that could really tackle this disease and maybe even reverse it. And what we used was the plant-based diet. As I showed you at the beginning, the red line here is people following a conventional diet. They improved some by cutting calories and limiting carbohydrate. But the people on the vegan diet, that's the blue line, did dramatically better. So let me give you an example of a person who did this. This is Vance. Vance was a policeman in Washington, D.C., and then he worked in a bank, and he went on the plant-based diet. And I want to tell you that one of the first things he said is, this is really, really easy. Now, many people think it must be hard to follow a plant-based diet. But he said, no. When I followed my previous diets, a diabetes diet meant cutting calories and going hungry a lot of the time, but we didn't make him do that. We just said, if you're having a bowl of chili or a curry, instead of it being a meat chili or meat curry, it would be a plant-based one with beans, chickpeas, vegetables. And he said, you know, it's the simplest diet ever. And over about a year, he lost 60 pounds. He stopped his diabetes medications. And his hemoglobin A1C dropped from 9.5, which is very poor control, to 5.3, which is normal. I want to tell you something. When I got his lab results, I closed my office door and I paced around in my office for about 10 or 15 minutes, asking myself, could I tell Vance that he was cured? He didn't have diabetes that anybody could detect anymore. He could go into any clinic in the world and they would not diagnose him of having type 2 diabetes. Let me show you what happened to Vance. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I was asking his permission to share his experience, and he said, make sure you tell everybody that my erectile dysfunction went away too. Okay, this is my most important slide. Let me ask you to pay close attention to this. I want to show you the cause of type 2 diabetes. What I'm showing you on the screen is a cell. You have millions and millions of cells in your body, and this is one of them. This big blue oval could be a muscle cell. Cells of your body work with glucose as their fuel. A car needs gasoline, your cells need glucose. The glucose can get through those little purple doorways into the cell, and once they do that, they can power the cell. But to get inside, they need a key, and that key is insulin. The insulin key arrives at a receptor, those red receptors, just like a key in a lock. And once the insulin arrives at the surface of the cell, it opens up the cell door to let the glucose inside. That's called insulin signaling. It goes through the cell and it opens those little channels. And now, can you see that? The cell is opening up and the glucose gets inside. If you have type 2 diabetes, you have insulin in your body. But the problem is the cell is resisting insulin. Why would that be? Because of those yellow blobs that you see. That's fat, chicken fat, pork fat, fish fat, olive oil, fryer grease, all kinds of fat get inside the cell, and when the fat builds up inside the cell, insulin can no longer work. If somebody took your front door lock and jammed also kinds of grease in it, it wouldn't be able to function anymore. So you have fat inside your cells that stops insulin from being able to work. Now, doctors hate a word like fat because it has only 3 letters. To sound more scientific, we'll call it intramyocellular lipid. Well, intra just means inside. Myo means muscle. Cellular means cellular. And lipid means fat. Fat buildup inside the cell leads to insulin resistance, and that leads to diabetes. Are you with me? Just to be very clear, when a person develops diabetes, they typically did not get there from eating sugar or bread. Those are blamed for it, but that's not the issue. The issue in most cases is fat building up inside the cell. This is even true for thin people. You may not have a lot of fat in your belly, but you can have fat in your liver cells and fat in your muscle cells that causes insulin resistance that leads to diabetes. Oh, so now it's clear why Vance got better. because he started a vegan diet. And how much animal fat is there in a vegan diet? None. And if you keep the vegetable oils low too, the fat drains out of the cells. The insulin resistance gives way to insulin sensitivity. Your blood sugar starts to drop. Your doctor takes you off your medications. And in some cases, the diabetes just goes away. And that's my most important point. The body can heal. If you cut your hand, a bandage doesn't heal you. It just protects you. Inside the DNA of every cell in your body is the programming that allows one cell to reach across a cut and connect with other cells and heal. If you break your leg, the cast doesn't heal you. It just holds your bones steady, because inside the DNA of your bone cells is the program that allows the bones to reconnect and become strong again. Well, your arteries can heal from blockages. Your body can heal from diabetes to a very substantial degree. But a cut on your skin will never heal if you keep picking at it. A broken bone will never heal if the cast is loose and the bones can't stay connected. Your arteries will never heal if you're eating cholesterol and animal fat every day. Diabetes cannot heal if the fat keeps funneling into our muscle cells. Our pains can't heal if we're missing fiber and eating lots of fat and eating dairy products that are spraying us with estrogen. The answer is to allow the body to heal. So I got very excited and I released this new book called Your Body in Balance. I just want to tell you about it briefly. I decided to talk about sex hormones and all the conditions that sex hormones can work their mischief with. Fertility and cramps and certain cancers and polycystic ovaries and menopause. But there are also metabolic issues like erectile dysfunction, diabetes, thyroid conditions, even moodiness. And then the key is we want to get healthier. So to get healthy means a healthy diet and also avoiding environmental chemicals to the extent you can. So I included tips on that. And we had menus and healthy recipes. So the foods on a healthy plant-based diet are delicious. Clean, healthy foods that make you feel fantastic. More delicious flavors than you've ever had in your life. And my hope is that instead of just thinking, okay, I'm eating foods and that can cause weight problems or cholesterol problems or diabetes, I want us to think much more in a more sophisticated manner that foods can control our hormones. Healthy foods can improve our hormones, and that in turn can help us improve many, many things that we had never imagined that we could do. So I hope you have found this helpful, but let me ask you a favor, if I may. Let me ask you to take what you have learned and share it with other people. We need to learn information. We need to connect with our friends. We need to share this. And the reason is that the people who need this message the most aren't watching this program. They might be 12 years old and they might be learning, well, a healthy diet means eating lots of cheese and paneer and so forth, or maybe even meat. They might have learned that the idea that meat is a part of a healthy diet. And unfortunately, all those mistaken ideas need to be unlearned. So sometimes we have to speak a little bit loudly and get the message out. So let me encourage you to take what you now know, share it with others as much as you possibly can. Finally, I want to thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you very much.